The young woman sat comfortably in her bed. It was around midnight. She should be getting to sleep since she had work early the next morning, but she was just too engrossed in the TV show to stop. It was a hit drama, and one of the protagonist's exes had just come back and they were having a huge fight. She sat watching, but froze as she seemed to hear a sort of scratching noise coming from down the hallway. She hesitated, then switched off the TV so she was immediately thrown into darkness and silence. The woman lived on her own. She felt fear strike her. What if someone was breaking in? Gradually, she got out of bed and stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway was eerily quiet. Nothing seemed to be there. Perhaps it was just a mouse. But then, without warning, a whole foundation of her house seemed to tremble. But it wasn't an earthquake. The wooden bars and metal frames seemed to bend and turn on their own accord. And then, the woman started to scream as suddenly her arm bent over at a right angle, at odds to her body. Next, her leg turned the other way, stretching out, tearing ligaments and shattering bones. She screamed as her body's bones stretched and tore and broke until she became nothing but a crooked corpse. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today, we bring you Keter class object SCP-783. Although it has not been seen by the naked eye, SCP-783 is some sort of entity that has been wreaking havoc on the small town of Temby, located in Oxfordshire, England, for quite some time. The entity only seems to be active every 12 years and preys only in the fall and winter months. It exclusively attacks those who are alone and indoors after sunset. Buildings housing SCP-783's current target will experience a steady degradation of their structural integrity. Outwardly, this is visible as faults and breaks on the outer facade which lend affected structures an angled or crooked appearance. This anomaly extends to any objects which breach the affected building's exterior, causing immediate and severe deformation that would normally be fatal to living subjects. Despite the nature of these injuries, most victims are alive after the cessation of an SCP-783 attack, though they often suffer full body paralysis or remain in a persistent vegetative state. 27 living specimens have been acquired and placed on life support. They are currently held in a wing of the local hospital located in Temby, given by the locals for Foundation use. To date, personnel have not been able to prevent any of the entity's attacks, nor have they been able to offer aid to its victims. Due to this, as well as SCP-783's effects on recording equipment, little is known regarding the entity's exact appearance and the nature of its powers. Victims of the entity attack exhibit gross deformations in their body structure as the result of dozens of compound fractures along their long bones and severely deplaced vertebrae. These breaks, however, are then rapidly healed, presumably by the entity. Once they are healed, more breaks are inflicted until limbs and body structures deform into crooked appearances. One subject's forearm has been recorded to extend over 2.4 meters, and another had a height of 12.5 meters. The residents of Temby are aware of the existence of SCP-783, though speaking of it publicly is considered taboo. Researchers have documented a playground song shared among local youths regarding the anomaly.
There lived a crooked man who made a crooked deal. He kept a crooked cane and his catching crooked creel. He stole a crooked child who cried a crooked squeal, and that crooked little man was broken on the wheel.
A month prior to SCP-783's current period of activity, Subject D-209 was selected from a group of volunteers to live in a Foundation-owned property in Temby. Audio and video recording equipment was installed throughout the house for observation purposes. The following was recorded on the 43rd day of his stay. The subject can be seen sitting upright in bed reading a book. In the living room, camera footage experiences a jagged vertical distortion in its display. This begins on the left of the frame, near the front door, and crosses over to the right side towards the hallway. It lasts approximately 23 seconds. In the bottom floor hallway, footage shows that floodlights from the window opposing the camera are obscuring something entering the hallway. A similar distortion effect occurs center frame, masking the object. Suddenly, the camera cuts off and ceases transmission. In the bottom floor living room, distortion can be seen to the left of the frame as SCP-783 enters. It appears as a jagged line, much like a zigzag. Back in the bedroom, the subject jerks upright, alert. He tells personnel that he hears a slow, prolonged scratching sound coming from the bottom floor. He begins to get up out of bed. Suddenly, footage from the staircase goes out and loses connection. From within his bedroom, audio devices catch the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the stairs. The subject attempts to open the window in his bedroom and escape, to no avail. The subject grabs a lamp from the nightstand and tries to smash the window open. Footage from the hallway outside suddenly ceases transmission as SCP-783 moves directly in front of the camera. Then, the subject freezes as a knock is heard at the door to his bedroom. The subject approaches the door, wielding the lamp as a weapon. He asks for the individual at the door to identify themselves, receiving no response. He then asks Control if any personnel were able to gain entry. Observing personnel maintain radio silence. The subject braces himself and grasps the doorknob with his free hand. He flings open the door. Suddenly, a loud snapping noise is heard throughout the house. All light bulbs on the premises burst simultaneously, including those being used by Foundation personnel observing outside the house. Once the cameras adjust to the sudden darkness, the subject can be seen screaming, clutching his right arm. It has been fractured just above the elbow and dangles freely. It is observed to swiftly harden, presumably due to rapid bone growth. From a separate camera in the bathroom, SCP-783 can be seen waiting silently. The subject tries to run, but as soon as he runs past the bathroom, a loud snapping noise is heard. The subject falls to the ground and screams for assistance. He reports that his leg has been broken. The subject is able to bring himself to a stand. He displays his right arm for the camera, which has been broken below the elbow. It is angled in the opposite direction from the previous fracture. The subject curses at the observing personnel, but reports that his pain has mostly subsided. He limps towards the stairs while trying to navigate the stairs. The subject trips and falls. 12 loud snaps are heard in rapid succession. Upon coming to rest, the subject exhibits several more fractures in various places along each limb. He screams as they set and spasms on the landing. After a few seconds of silence, the subject starts to try and move. He struggles to crawl, eventually passing out of frame. From the bottom floor living room camera, the subject can be seen dragging himself into the room. He strains, moving with great difficulty due to his deformed limbs. Each arm is estimated to be over 2 meters in length, with several inflexible breaks that inhibit motion around obstacles. Meanwhile, in the bottom floor kitchen, SCP-783 is spotted for a brief second, but then the entity seems to disappear. Back in the living room, the subject now occupies the majority of the space in the living room, his lower leg stretched out of frame into the hallway. He has a hand on the knob of the front door, but the length of his fingers does not allow him to turn the knob. A scratching sound is audible in the hallway. The subject has started to cry. Suddenly, something out of frame drags him away. He screams, but then his screams are cut off abruptly. The events of this day proved to be rather worrisome for Foundation personnel. They were unable to access the house due to the deformities of its structure, and the events had occurred so quickly that it prevented swift action. The subject's body was retrieved the next morning, already dead. Additionally, at the time the subject's screams ceased, all 27 living SCP-783 victims in Foundation care went into seizure. Despite the fact that the majority were brain dead or wholly paralyzed, they convulsed for several minutes. 2 present researchers were injured during the incident. Life support systems for several patients were compromised, killing 5. A vast quantity of earth was disturbed on the outskirts of Temby during this time. After this event, reports were made of activity in the burial grounds for SCP-783 victims. When Foundation personnel were dispatched to the scene, they found the toes and fingers of the victims peeking out from underground. After approval from commanders at the time, the grave was dug up and bodies were inspected. The corpses were inanimate, but Agent Singer, a head overseer of the inspection, suddenly felt the bodies beneath her give way, and then she was sucked into the mass of bodies and soon lost from sight. For the next hour, personnel tried to retrieve Agent Singer using rope and a pulley system, but there was no sign of her. Next, Subject D-2172 was called upon the scene to travel into the pit and relocate Agent Singer. He was attached to a heavy harness and lowered into the pit. The corpses remained inanimate. The following is a recording of the subject's expedition into the pit. Transmission begins as the subject is being lowered by crane over the pit of SCP-783 victims. Visual feed reduces in clarity intermittently as limbs and bodies pass close to the lenses. At 18 meters, the subject reports a sense of vertigo and expresses confusion regarding the direction of travel. After a brief discussion with command, it is determined that the subject had experienced an inversion of gravity. The subject manages to reorient themselves and proceeds to climb upwards from their perspective in order to continue descent. Ambient light levels begin to increase as 20 meters of tether are expanded. Daylight can be seen shortly thereafter. From the camera view, it appears to be the same town of Temby and is assumed to be some sort of alternate reality. The subject pans the camera down to show the mound of corpses at their feet. To the north is a small stone cottage belonging to a Mr. John Myers, and beyond that, the main road into town. The subject is asked to inspect the cottage, and they comply. Inside, the cottage is abandoned. There's nothing unordinary apart from an odd sketching, seemingly made of charcoal, on the wall by the bed. The sketching appears to be of a human figure sat up, stretching out a hand as if begging for help. The subject backs away from the drawing, expressing a sense of unease in its presence. The subject is asked to head outside and walk down the road. After a few minutes of walking, the subject finds a boot on the road. They pick it up and note that it belongs to Agent Singer. The subject is asked to inspect the nearby 2-story building. The subject enters. Unlike the cottage, this place appears in a mess. Couches and cupboards lay scattered and overturned. As the subject nears the kitchen sink, a small pool of blood can be seen on the floor. There is a clear pattern of cast-off spatter on the walls and counter, with long strokes indicating that an assailant delivered several successive blows with a bladed weapon. The subject kneels to take a sample of the blood, and upon standing, a butcher's block can be seen laying on its side next to the sink. A series of passive blood stains leads from the subject's location and towards a door on the far end of the room. The subject opens the door, and this leads down to a basement. The subject expresses a refusal to head down, but Control threatens leaving them behind in this alternate reality if he does not investigate the basement, and so they comply. In the basement, more blood stains the walls and floors. A small vent appears particularly messy. The subject inspects it, and from the camera view, a fleshy substance can be seen crawling down the vent. The subject cries out and backs away, and then escapes from the basement in a hurry. Outside, victims of SCP-783 can now be seen littering the streets. They appear dead as the subject moves. Cracking sounds can be heard, and a pan of the camera reveals these corpses have changed positions. The subject begins to panic and takes off running despite Control's orders to stay on the road. The subject disappears into the woods seeking cover. The subject continues to run for some time. They're attempting to exit the town of Temby, but as they run, suddenly they cry out in shock as they find themselves back at the cottage. Despite running in one direction for 20 minutes, the subject has returned to the town of Temby. Control finds this particularly interesting. Suddenly, the subject screams and the camera pans upward. The form of Agent Singer is suspended high in the air, balanced on elongated and grossly enlarged fingers. The Singer creature screams a hollow sound and pounces on the subject. The subject can be seen bringing out their firearm and rounding 6 shots into Singer, but Singer displays no reaction to the wounds. The subject calls to Control to reel them back in using the harness, and Control complies. The subject suddenly lurches as they're dragged back, but the Singer creature still pounces after him. Suddenly, the camera footage ceases, the last frame being of Singer's deformed face with 3 bullet holes in it, snarling like a wild animal. 2 hours later, back at the surface, the pulley system continues to reel the subject's harness in. Eventually it does, and the subject's hand is spotted. Personnel help to drag the subject out from the pit of corpses, but realize there's nothing left of the subject except for their dismembered hand. They let go, and the hand crawls away back into the pit. What did you think of that SCP case? If you came across SCP-783, how would you escape? Let us know in the comments below. Please make sure you subscribe too so you don't miss out on any of these creepy tales.